How is your relationship with God and with the church and religion and so on?
My connection with God is wireless. I feel that the church.
But you believe in Him?
Yeah. I totally believe in him. I believe I believe that my connection with God is wireless. I believe that the connection through the church is analog. You understand?
Yeah.
I think that the church is a dial-up connection, and it's a bit too slow. I don't think I need to ask. Like my father was a Baptist minister. And I met people.
And your mother also played a very important
teacher.
role in this church, I think.
Yes, yes. My mother taught Sunday school. I taught Sunday school. When I was 12 or 13 years old, I started teaching Sunday school in church.
So sometimes you connect with the church and sometimes you don't?
Well, I grew up in the church. But at some point, it was important for me to realize that there is God and there are man-made interpretations of God that sometimes are more reflective of faults and failures and fears within ourselves than they are of God. We project our fears onto God and say that those fears come out of the mouth of God. I don't believe in that.
So you don't believe in sins?
Oh, it's not a matter of not believing in sins. I mean, for instance, it's important to understand that the word sin comes from Hebrew, and that word means to miss the target. Okay? So yes, I believe in missing the target.
Yeah.
Just like if you were to ask me, so you don't believe in repenting? And I would hear my father preach about repenting, and the common thought about what it means to repent is to get on your knees and beg for forgiveness. But the word that was used in the actual scriptures was Greek, and it was metanoia, which means beyond the mind or change of mind. And then it was translated to Latin, to pensare, to think, right? And so to repent doesn't mean to fall on your knees and beg for forgiveness. It means to think again. So if you miss the target, think again. It's much more empowering than if you commit a crime against God, fall on your knees and beg Him for forgiveness. One empowers you, and one puts you in a position of saying, I am not in control over this. I believe that we have some control.
And which is the part we don't control?
All of it. And that's where the contradiction is. Oscar Wilde has a wonderful quote where he says, I contradict myself, ? I contradict myself, ! Or Henry David Thoreau has, do you know the American philosopher Henry David Thoreau?
I've heard of him.
Yeah. He has an amazing quote where he says, if I contradict myself, it is because I contain multitudes.
Yeah, we're not plain.
Yeah. But sometimes I think that the man-made aspects of religion play. They play in places where I think it's more serious than that, And so I am not beholden to any religion, but I consider myself extremely spiritual, and most of my work is about defining and feeling and celebrating that connection to the eternal, to the Creator, I just don't think that I need a singular book to define that.
Or a singular church.
Or a singular church.
Your relationship with music started
in the church.
Even before, because you were almost born at a James Brown concert,
Very
right?
true, very true. The night before I was born, my mom took my two older sisters to a James Brown concert, and she said that as the music started getting intense, I started kicking, and so there was a church member who was there with her. She asked them to take care of my sisters, and an ambulance came and brought my mom to the hospital. And a few hours later, I was born.
You say that the more you discover yourself as a musician, the more you pay attention to that instant.
Yes.
Why so? Was that a presage or something like that?
Well, it's interesting.
Do you see it as it?
What I see it as is this, is that the more I listen to James Brown, and I didn't grow up listening to James Brown. I began listening to James Brown at a very specific period in my life, which was when I lived in Brazil.
When you were 16?
I was 16 years old. I was an exchange student to Brazil. I lived in the state of Paraná, in a small city called Goiânia. And up until then, I had been like this with hip-hop. I only listened to hip-hop. That was my religion. And then I came to Brazil, and hip-hop wasn't really there yet. It was 89, 88. Hip-hop wasn't really popular there. I couldn't find it on the radio stations. And so I started listening to other things that I had been meaning to get to. Oh, I always wanted to listen to this. And so I started listening to James Brown, for instance. And yeah.
To another player.
Yeah. Yeah. And it opened me up. Of course, I started listening to Gilberto Gil and George Ben and Olodun and so many, you know, people. But in the same way, James Brown helped me understand my relationship to rhythm. Which is something that, of course, was always evident in hip-hop, you know. But rhythm means so much to me as a writer of poetry, as a creator of music, as a performer. It's all ways of accentuating, pronunciating, and framing silence, essentially. And what I mean by that is that, you know, for me, a great beat might go something like, and that space there, is where I'm talking from. Don't you see that? We could, you know, those gaps and how we fill those gaps is how I came to realize that there was space for me. It's the timing, you know, and so
it enhances the message somehow.
Exactly. Finding the perfect time, finding the perfect placement, you know.
So the silence can say a lot.
Yeah, it can, and so can a polyrhythm, you know. And so the more I make music, the more I go back to James Brown and go, that's what you were doing there. Because there's something that he is doing that he touched upon, you know, that made the first 10 years of hip-hop strictly based on samples of James Brown. The first 10 years of hip-hop, any artist you name that came out definitely used a James Brown sample. But James Brown did it.
Like the grandfather of hip-hop.
Exactly. You know, so that, you know, what James Brown was to hip-hop is maybe what Paul was to Christianity. He spread the message.
Before the rise of hip-hop in 1981, as we've seen, did you already feel the rhythm in you, in your childhood?
Yes, certainly. I was a dancer as a kid. You know, at the same time I started rapping, I was breakdancing. The first thing that I was excited about in church, you know, like we'd sit, you know, quietly when they read the scriptures, but when the choir sang, that was always exciting.
That touched you?
Yeah, that touched me. You know, I loved that, you know. So music was always, and rhythm within that was always essential. And the thing about hip-hop in particular was that we were like, take all the other instruments away. I just want to hear the drums. I just want to hear the drums. And our parents couldn't understand that, you know. They're like, this is just drums and people talking. Like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And it's the same thing that made me cry the first time I experienced Carnival in Brazil.
In Brazil.
You know, and I heard the batucada and coming from every direction, 500 drums, you know. And I was just like, this is heaven. You know, like it was so much. It was so much. It was everything I'd ever wanted to hear.
Do you often cry to music?
Yes.
Any music in particular, or
it depends.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. You know, there's always been songs that have been capable of making me cry. The first hip hop song that I ever cried to was "Welcome to the Terror Dome" by Public Enemy. And the moment came because I was actually at my school and we were having a party there and the song came on and I went from enjoying the song to noticing how everybody else was in the moment and then listening to the lyrics and realizing that what Malcolm X said and what Martin Luther King said, that they were furthering the message, but they had found a way to put it in the music, you know, like slipping, you know, something in the water so that we were all, you know, like in the song he says, make you all dance along to your education.
And that was happening.
And that was happening. And that moment of realization was enough for me to go, this is beautiful. You know, and I've had tons of moments like that. My first time in Africa, I was in Mali, Senegal, the Gambia, and I remember going to a club in Mali and hearing hip-hop in the club, and they were playing Rakim, who was like one of my favorite rappers as a kid, but I was, you know, very close to Timbuktu, actually, literally, and was amazed that these kids were in there like, oh, this is us. And I was like, oh my God. This little village called New York that created this thing has actually empowered even these kids here. And we're all a part of that.
That's globalization, right?
Yeah. You know, but it was truly.
That is the best part of it.
Yeah, that's the good side of it, right? But in that same trip, I had an old person tell me when I was showing interest in the mudcloth that he was making. He was like, "Wow, why are you interested in this?" He said, "Our kids here aren't interested anymore." I said, "Why?" He said, "Oh, we just got MTV."
That trip to Africa was a graduation gift, right?
Yes. I just graduated from Morehouse College in Atlanta, and my mother had been. Me and my sisters were all exchange students when we were in high school. And so then my mom finally was like, well, now I'm going to be an exchange teacher since you guys are all gone. I was the youngest, so I was already graduating from college. So she spent that last year teaching English and math in the Gambia. And my graduation gift was to go visit her. And it is on that trip that I began writing poetry. I bought a journal because I'm going to Africa. As an African American, that sense of like, we know where we're from, but we don't know what country, we don't know what language, we don't know what tribe, and so there's this whole general perception of Africa as the motherland. And
did you feel that?
Oh, definitely. It was so.
I belong here.
Not that I belong here. I
came
came from here. It was, it was just a sense of like, wow, like I grew up, looking like this around other African Americans who would tease me about being so dark. And no one in my family is this dark. It's just the way I came out, and when I arrived in Senegal first, and I saw everybody kind of looking like me, I was like,
I'm not that dark.
Oh, yeah, I'm light-skinned now. There was something really beautiful about it, Of course, there were people there who would take advantage of it, like, you are home, we need more money, please, buy these pants.
Then you started, oh, these black guys.
But yeah, it was definitely a beautiful experience. And I had a surreal moment there when I took a train from Dakar, Senegal to Bamako, Mali with my mother. And a long story short, I had just kept a journal and I was writing in the journal in the train with my mom, and it was very late, and my mom had fallen asleep, and I thought it was time to turn out the light in the car, in the train, and there was no light switch. And I realized that the light wasn't coming from the train.
From the moon?
Well, I went to the window, and the moon was like, and I was like, oh, that's what they mean by moonlight. Because growing up in New York, there's so much artificial light that you never really get to experience the heavens. And so that trip in Africa was actually the first time that I took time to look up and go, wow, this is amazing. Look at those stars. Look at how big the moon is. You could still see everything. Everything was moonlit. It was just a blue light outside. It was madrugada. and it had it completely shifted my relationship to nature, which began my relationship with poetry.